The Singapore Grand Prix is over, but its consequences are still echoing through the paddock. A race that promised fireworks in the title fight delivered a masterclass in strategy, defense, and for some, frustration. We had a defensive Red Bull, a McLaren with what seemed to be the fastest car of the night but stuck in traffic, and drivers navigating turbulent waters. What really happened on the streets of Marina Bay? And more importantly, what does it mean for the future? Stick with us as we break down every detail. Let's start by talking about Sauber's Gabriel Bortoleto, for whom the weekend in Singapore was particularly tough. The driver, who started from 14th, had his race practically decided right at the first corner. In a chaotic start where cars squeeze into any available space, Bortoleto found himself in the middle of a sandwich, side by side with two other competitors. The result, as often happens on street circuits, was not good. He made contact that damaged his front wing, and as we know, in Singapore, any small problem at the start can cost you the entire race. In Bortoleto's own words, "Definitely not our best race. I had some damage after the contact in the first corner of the opening lap. We were 3 wide, and unfortunately, there was a touch that broke my front wing." This damage forced the team to call him in for a pit stop much earlier than planned, which dropped him to the back of the pack. From there, the race became an exercise in patience and damage limitation. The pace of the Sauber car wasn't the strongest to begin with, and the situation worsened when he found himself stuck behind Franco Colapinto. Bortoleto explained the difficulty. "It's extremely difficult to overtake here. I spent most of the time stuck behind him, which also allowed others to close in." In the end, he crossed the finish line in just 17th place, scoring no points. Despite the frustrating result, the driver's mindset is what stands out, focusing on taking the positives and the learnings from a weekend he himself described as extremely difficult. With that, he remains at 18 points in the championship in 18th position. And speaking of the future and new paths for drivers, let's now turn to Felipe Drugovich, who is opening a new and important chapter in his career. After 3 years as Aston Martin's reserve driver in Formula 1, the 2022 Formula 2 champion is back to full-time racing, and his destination is Formula E with the Andretti team. This is a significant move, putting him back in competition and in a series that's growing every year. Drugovich already had a taste of the category when he replaced Nick de Vries in Berlin last season, and his performance, scoring good points for the Mahindra team, clearly impressed Andretti. Now what everyone wants to know are the details of that contract. Drugovich himself revealed that for now, the deal is for 1 year. He said, "At the moment, we're looking forward to 1 year. I think there is an option for other years, but it's something that we are actually looking to see if it's going to be a good season or not." What makes this so interesting is what's coming next in Formula E, the Gen 4 era. The series is about to introduce much faster and more advanced cars at the end of 2026, and many teams are already offering multi-year contracts to ensure stability during this transition. Drugovich is keeping a close eye on this and seemed excited, saying he hopes to be there for this new phase. In other words, this first season will be decisive for him to establish himself in the series and secure his place in this promising new era of electric motorsport. Analyses like these, which go beyond the headlines and dive deep into the strategy and the future of the drivers, are what we do here. So if you enjoy this kind of detailed content and want to stay on top of everything that really matters in Formula 1, now is the time to act. Since our channel isn't monetized, the single best way to support us is to subscribe to Formula News USA and hit that like button. Your subscription and your comments are the fuel that powers this channel. It tells YouTube that you value this content and helps us reach more passionate F1 fans just like you. And speaking of which, I want to know, what city are you watching from? Comment below so we can get an idea of how far our work is reaching. Moving from the future of the drivers to the future of the teams, one of the most fascinating battles in Formula 1 isn't happening on the track, but in the factories, especially as we approach a massive regulation change like the one in 2026. At the center of this strategic debate are Red Bull and McLaren, with completely different approaches. While most of the grid, including McLaren, has already stated they've stopped developing their 2025 car to focus 100% on the 2026 project, Red Bull continues to bring significant upgrades to its RB21. We saw a new floor in Monza, which Verstappen himself said definitely helped, and a new front wing in Singapore. The question is, why? Is Red Bull risking its long-term future for short-term gains? The answer is more complex than it seems. Laurent Mekies, the Red Bull team principal, openly admitted that continuing to develop the current car does come at a cost to the 2026 project. He said, "Of course it comes at a cost, undoubtedly to the 26 project, but we feel it's the right trade-off for us." And the reason for this right trade-off is the need for validation. For Mekies, it's crucial that the team understands if the current project still has more performance to extract, because the tools and methodology they use to find that performance will be the same for next year's car, even with completely different regulations. In other words, they're using the RB21 as a test bed to ensure their data, their wind tunnel, and their simulators are all speaking the same language. McLaren's Andrea Stella even suggested this is one reason Red Bull's advantage has recently narrowed, as his team shifted focus a long time ago. But here's the key part of the analysis. Red Bull's situation is unique. For about 18 months, the team had been struggling with a lack of correlation between the data from the factory and what was happening on track. Former team boss Christian Horner once said they were looking at different watches. To ignore this problem and start the 2026 project would be like building a house on unstable ground. Therefore, Red Bull is making a calculated bet. They might be losing some 2026 development time now, but they are ensuring that when they do focus on the new car, they will do so with reliable tools and accurate data. It's a strategy to avoid going into the new era blind and risking a fundamental error that could compromise several seasons. And this mindset of seeking answers and making calculated bets at Red Bull was also directly reflected in their race strategy in Singapore. Max Verstappen started on the front row, but with a different tire choice from most, the softs, while pole sitter George Russell was on mediums. It was an aggressive move, and Laurent Mekies explained why. According to him, it was a choice of aggressiveness they felt was necessary to have a shot at overtaking Russell at the start. With how difficult it is to overtake at Marina Bay, the team believed that was perhaps their only opportunity to fight for the win. However, the gamble didn't pay off. Verstappen didn't get the necessary traction to get past Russell at the start, and very quickly the aggressive strategy showed its downside. The soft tires began to degrade much faster, which, in Mekies' words, exposed us to have more degradation, to have basically a more difficult car to deal with. As a result, Verstappen's race transformed. Instead of attacking for the lead, he spent most of his time in defensive mode, managing older tires and holding off intense pressure from Lando Norris. To make matters worse, Verstappen was complaining of several issues with the car, including the downshifts and the overall balance. In the end, Red Bull managed to salvage a second place, a result that, under the circumstances, was the maximum possible. The strategy didn't deliver the win, but it demonstrated the team's willingness to risk it all to try and turn an unfavorable situation around. But what about the driver? What did Max Verstappen think of all this? Interestingly, his post-race analysis found common ground with none other than George Russell, his front-row rival. Despite the heated rivalry between them, both agreed on a crucial point that defined the race's outcome. Russell, the winner of the night, was the first to admit that the story could have been very different. He said, "I thought it was a smart move from those guys, Red Bull, to start with the softs, because if Max had jumped me at turn 1, I think he would have won the race because overtaking was so challenging." And what was Verstappen's response to this statement? A direct agreement. "Yeah, I think so too," said the four-time champion. This simple exchange says everything about the nature of the Singapore GP. Verstappen explained that he already knew it would be tough to even hold his position starting from the dirty side of the grid. The team opted for the soft tires, hoping that the pre-race rain had cleaned the track a bit, giving him a chance to attack Russell. But, as he said, once I didn't achieve that, it was a proper management race. He had to keep the soft tires alive long enough to make a stop in an acceptable window, and then manage the hard tires, which were about 6 or 7 laps older than Russell's and Norris's. Add to that the shifting and balance issues he faced throughout the race, and it's clear why he stated, "Second was just the maximum that we could do today." The entire race was decided in those first few hundred feet. And this view from the drivers is perfectly validated by a deeper analysis of the race. Journalist Mark Hughes gives us a fascinating perspective on why the night in Singapore unfolded the way it did. And it all starts with a concept called the overtaking delta. In Singapore, to pass a car, you need to be about 1.5 seconds per lap faster. This is only feasible when there's a big tire difference, which doesn't happen in a one-stop race. As a result, the start and the first lap become the decisive moment. Red Bull's gamble on the soft tire wasn't enough to overcome the grip deficit on the left side of the grid, allowing Russell to escape without trouble. And here comes the most interesting point of Hughes' analysis. Red Bull's failed strategy ironically ended up helping George Russell. Verstappen's Red Bull, on faster degrading tires, acted as a bottleneck. It held up what was probably the fastest car of the night, Lando Norris's McLaren. Russell himself realized this after the race, saying, "Lando looked incredibly fast today. He was within 1s of Max the whole race, and around here that's not easy." Essentially, Russell was able to dominate because he was in clean air, while his main adversary, Norris, was stuck in the dirty air of a car that, although ahead, was slower due to its tires. McLaren had superior race pace, especially with its low tire degradation, but didn't have the track position to use it. As Andrea Stella said, "We did not have the fastest car in qualifying, and that determined the outcome today." For McLaren, the situation was even more complex due to its own internal dynamics. Norris's overtake on Piastri at the start was a standard racing incident, but one with huge consequences. By gaining the position, Norris also secured priority in the pit stop strategy, and that's where things got complicated. Piastri, to save his tires, backed off a bit from the leaders, but this left him vulnerable to an undercut from Charles Leclerc. To defend against it, McLaren needed to pit Piastri earlier than ideal. However, Norris, exercising his right as the lead car, refused to let Piastri pit before him. The result? McLaren had to pit Norris early just so they could pit Piastri on the next lap to cover Leclerc. In this strategic dance, by prioritizing his advantage over his teammate, Norris may have sacrificed his own chance to attack Verstappen later, as his tire age advantage over the Red Bull driver was smaller than it could have been. And all of this was, once again, great news for George Russell, who watched his rivals neutralize each other as he cruised to victory. And this complex web of strategies saw its conclusion in the second half of the race, after the round of pit stops sealed the leaders' fates. George Russell had managed to build a 9-second lead in the first stint. However, as soon as Verstappen pitted and was out of the way, the true pace of the McLarens in clean air became evident. Norris and Piastri began to eat into Russell's lead by almost half a second per lap, showing that the orange car was indeed the strongest force of the night in terms of race pace. Most impressively, Verstappen, even on new tires that should have been about a second faster, was only running 0.2 to 0.3 seconds faster than the McLarens on old tires. This only confirmed the scenario. Red Bull was in trouble, with Verstappen fighting high rear tire degradation, which forced him to use brake balance and torque maps that compromised the efficiency of the car's electrical regeneration. Despite the chase from the McLarens, Russell's initial lead was enough for him to make his stop and still emerge comfortably in the lead. And, crucially, because the McLarens had to pit earlier than ideal due to their internal dynamics, Verstappen still remained between them and the Mercedes driver, acting as a protective shield for the Briton. Norris even got very close to Verstappen on a couple of occasions, but the difficulty of overtaking on the track created a stalemate. From there, the race for the top three was set, a virtual deadlock until the checkered flag. Meanwhile, the fight in the midfield had its own twists, especially for the Ferrari duo. Charles Leclerc, who had a good start, saw his race compromised by a serious problem. His brakes were overheating. He couldn't hold the position against Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes. And the same brake drama hit Lewis Hamilton. The British driver, now at Ferrari, made a second stop for soft tires, taking advantage of the large gap he had to 8th place. Ferrari even asked Leclerc to let him pass so that Hamilton on fresh tires could try to attack Antonelli. However, the effort was in vain. On the penultimate lap, Hamilton's brakes finally gave out, with the car trailing Sparks and forcing him to crawl to the finish line. To make matters worse, he received a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits while limping, which dropped him behind Fernando Alonso in the official results. And so, the Singapore GP left us with more questions than answers. George Russell's victory wasn't just the result of good pace, but of a perfect combination of factors: a brilliant pole position that gave him clean air, a risky and failed strategy from his main rival, Red Bull, and the fact that this same rival ended up blocking the car that was, on paper, the fastest of all, the McLaren. As Russell himself said at the end, it was a performance that surprised him, and he knew the victory was only possible because Norris got stuck behind Verstappen. It was a race that proves, once again, that in Formula One, raw speed is only part of the equation. If you made it this far and enjoyed this deep dive analysis that goes way beyond the final results, please don't forget to hit the like button and, most importantly, subscribe to Formula News USA. As a non-monetized channel, your subscription is the #1 way to show your support and help us grow. Share this video with a friend who's also addicted to F1 and leave your final comment below. In your opinion, what was the moment that truly defined the race? The start, Red Bull's tire strategy, or McLaren's internal battle? We want to know what you think. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you in the next video.